Anybody besides me notice that life just seems to keep getting faster? And we'll pay people that help us hurry. Citicorp became the #1 lender of money in America when they said they'd cut in half the amount of time it takes for you to find out whether or not you get a loan. Denny's experienced a big explosion in the restaurant business because they said they would get lunch to your table in 10 minutes or less. And they used to bring a little timer out to the table so you could make sure you got it in 10 minutes. Domino's became the #1 seller of pizzas in America because they guaranteed they would deliver a pizza to your house in 30 minutes or less. And we loved that. The CEO of Domino's said, "We don't sell pizzas, we sell delivery." And if you've ever had a Domino's pizza, the LA Times had an interview a while ago with a Domino's pizza driver. It's a kid that drives Domino's pizzas to people's homes. And he says when he puts the Domino's sign on his car and drives, other drivers pull over to the side of the road to let him go past them, like we used to do for ambulances. We don't do that for ambulances anymore. We do it for the Domino's guy. Why? Because he's in a hurry. Now, you'll think I'm making this up, but I'm not. This is in USA Today. Taking a cue from Domino's Pizza, a Detroit hospital guarantees that emergency room patients will be seen within 20 minutes or treatment is free. So far, Doctors Hospital has delivered. Since the offer was first made June 24 on cable TV, business has been up 30%. Now, the mortality rate's up 120%. People are dying, but they're dying fast, and that's all we're really after. We'll pay for anything that we think might free up sometimes. We're just surrounded by fax machines, FedExes, ATMs, cell phones, beepers, pages, Palm Pilots, modems, email. And we think all of that stuff's going to save us, but it ends up enslaving us. Newsweek had an article about a guy that went on vacation, lives in California on vacation for 2 weeks, came home to over 1,000 email messages that he had to answer. We're just enslaved by this stuff. Richard Swenson says, you want to get somebody a great gift this Christmas? He says the gift we mostly need would be a phoneless cord. You have to think about that one for a minute. In the late 60s, 1967, expert testimony was given to the United States Senate that said because of all this labor-saving technology, people were going to have more time than they knew what to do with. It predicted that within 20 or 30 years, the average American would work something like only 30 hours a week or something like only 30 weeks a year. I hope you feel so ashamed right now. Oh. About that same time, late 1960s, 67 or so, a new kind of restaurant began to be very popular in our... We got to re-talk about the pizza deal, huh? We got to get the Domino's guy here for all of us. About 1967, a new kind of restaurant began to become very popular in America, and it sold food based not on the quality of the food, not even on the pricing of the food, but on the fact that the food could be delivered quickly. And we called it fast food. Not good food, not even cheap food. It's fast food. That's what we're looking for, fast food. But even with that, you still had to park your car, walk all the way inside the restaurant, wait in line, and order, and then take the food over to the table and sit down. And all of that took time, so we invented the drive-through lane so families could eat in vans as God intended them to do. And the beauty of that is when you don't have time, even for the drive-through lane, you can just have the kids scrounge around the cracks in the seats for French fries and old gummy bears, and you don't even have to go to the drive-through lane. I've seen your vans. I know what they look like. Now, a guy named Meyer Friedman says in our society, we suffer from what he calls hurry sickness. He says it's actually a kind of disease. And it kills us physically, and it kills us spiritually. And my guess is that all of us who live in this society battle this disease in one form or another. So just to kind of level the playing field, I want to do a mass confession now. I want to ask everybody here who suffers from hurry sickness in one form or another to actually raise your hand. You might even want to stand. No, not yet. See, this is just what I'm talking about right here. Go. People saying, we know where you're going with this. Just let us get it over with. Just humor me for a moment here. Run through a few different kind of categories, and then at the end of that, I'll ask that we do kind of a mass confession of hurry. If this is you, you often find yourself feeling like there's just not enough hours in the day. You just wish you had more time. You feel like you're quite often in a race. And you act like that sometimes. If this is you, sometimes when you come to an intersection where there's a stoplight, there's 2 lanes, 1 car in each lane, you think real carefully about which car you're going to get behind. You find yourself guessing based on the make, model, and year of the car. Who's going to get away fastest? Because God forbid you should get behind the slower moving car. And if you're a woman and it's early in the morning, you do all of this while applying full facial makeup at the same time. If you wrestle with hurry sickness and you're at a grocery store and there's one of 2 lines you can get in, line A or line B, you count how many people, how many carts, how many items per count. And if you're really sick, not only do you do that, but when you get in line A, you keep track of the person who would have been you in line B. You keep watching that person. Because if you're still in line and that person's all the way out the door, you're kind of depressed for the rest of the day. Okay, now, how many people in here ever suffer from hurry sickness? Just raise your hands, would you? You are a sick bunch of people. That's what I thought. And the result of all of this hurry is we're an exhausted society. One of the major news weeklies this last week had as its cover story the headline, "Sleepless in America." Inadequate sleep, they wrote, is a workaholic's badge of honor. Sociologists did a survey some time ago and asked people, if you could have 1 more hour in the day to do anything that you wanted to, what would it be? You want to guess what the number 1 answer was? Sleep. An hour of the day to do anything. Climb mountains, dream great dreams, do great deeds, live life to its fullest. Sleep. Number 1. Newsweek some time ago interviewed a woman named Gretchen Rubin who lives in the Chicago area who said her idea of a vacation was a trip to the dentist. She said, I just can't wait to lay back in the chair and relax. Friends, when the highlight of your week is a root canal, there is something wrong. And it's not just that we're exhausted and tired and irritable. We're going to miss out on what matters. A father would come home from work every day, always bring his briefcase home. Every day come home, every day have his briefcase. And his son's kind of troubled by this and a little confused. And he finally says to his father, Dad, how come you bring home your briefcase every day? And the dad says, well, son, it's because I can't get all that work done at the office. And his son said, well, Dad, couldn't they put you in a slower group? Now, Jesus one time wanted to talk about this tendency that even real smart human beings have to go real fast and do lots of stuff and miss out on what's central, not attend to what really matters. So in typical fashion as a master teacher, he told a story. This really is in the Bible. It's in Luke chapter 12. You can look at it later on if you want to. But what I'd like to do is kind of retell it the way that I think Jesus might tell it if he was telling it in our day, in our culture, right here. This is a story of a man who would be very much at home in our society, kind of a workaholic, a venture capitalist. He knew the odds are against getting any venture up and running over a number of years, and he was committed. He was willing to do whatever it took to succeed, and it took everything. He found himself consumed by his work, 12, 14-hour days, working weekends. He joined professional organizations and boards of directors to expand his contacts. And even when he wasn't working, his mind was always drifting towards his work. So it wasn't just his occupation, it was his preoccupation. His wife would often try to get him to slow down, to remember that he had a family. And he was vaguely aware that life was passing, that his kids were growing up, and he was missing it. From time to time, they would complain to him about games of catch they weren't playing, or books that he wasn't reading to them, or lunches they weren't eating together. But after a while, they stopped complaining because they stopped expecting it would ever be any different. He would tell himself, I'll be more available to my family in 6 months or so when things settle down. And although he was a very bright guy, this man in Jesus' story, he didn't seem to notice that things never settled down. Besides, he'd say to himself when he felt guilty, I'm doing it all for them, doing it all for them. One morning, about 1 o'clock in the morning, he was awakened by this twinge in his chest, and his wife made an appointment for him to see the doctors. They told him he'd had a slight heart attack. They warned him he had all the classic symptoms: elevated blood pressure, high cholesterol. There needed to be some serious changes in his routine. And for a while there were. He got a lot of very expensive, very sophisticated equipment to track all of his health issues, percentage of body fat and everything. You don't really need all that stuff. Ken Davis writes, if you really insist on knowing the fat content of your body, I've developed a method that won't cost you a cent. Next time you get out of the shower, grab a stopwatch and stand in front of a full-length mirror totally naked. Start the watch and stamp your foot on the floor as hard as you can. When stuff stops moving, punch the watch and check the tire. He writes, I'm down to 2 days, 3 hours, and 6 minutes. Well, for a while, this guy in Jesus' story has all this equipment and works on it, but after his symptoms go away, his motivation to change goes away. He says to himself, there'll be plenty of time for that in 6 months or so, when things settle down. He recognizes that his life is really out of balance. He thinks occasionally about God and about church. There's one down the street. And he intends to go sometime, but Sunday morning seems to be the only time he can crash. Besides, he says to himself, I can believe without going to church. There'll be time for church when things settle down. One day, the COO of his company comes to this guy. And the COO says, you're not going to believe this, but things are booming to such an extent that we can't keep up. This is our chance to strike the mother lode. If we catch this wave, we'll be set for life. But it will require major changes. We've got inventory headaches around here you would not believe. Orders are coming in so fast that supply cannot keep up with demand. Our software is hopelessly outdated. And if we don't overhaul this company from top to bottom, if you don't do something, it's going to be a disaster. Now, from that time on, this man is a man possessed. And he devotes every waking moment to this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And then it hits him. He'll put his company through a technological revolution. They'll go .com, they'll go wireless, paperless, e-commerce, high-tech, total reorg, set the date for the IPO. When he goes home that evening, he says to his wife, you know what this means, don't you? Once I've put us through this reorg, we can relax because our future will be assured. We'll be set for life. He says, I know the market. I've covered every base. I have anticipated every contingency. We will be financially secure. But she'd heard this song before. She didn't get her hopes up. About 11 o'clock that night, she decided to go up to bed, and she asked him, you coming with me? He said, no, you go ahead, sitting in front of his computer. I got a little more stuff I want to do. I'll be up there in just a couple minutes. You go first. I'll be right there. She did, and she went to sleep. When she woke up, she looked at the clock. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, and he still hadn't come to bed. She walked downstairs, and she could see he was still in front of the computer terminal, his head resting on his arm. She said, this is ridiculous, like being married to a little kid. He'd rather fall down, asleep down here in front of the screen than come up to bed. So she went to touch him on the shoulder to wake him up, to bring him to bed, but his skin was cold to her touch. And he did not respond to her voice. And she got this sick, panicky feeling in her stomach. And she dialed 911. But by the time the paramedics got there, they told her that he'd had a massive coronary and had already been dead for hours. His death was a major story in the financial community. His obituary was written up in Forbes and the Wall Street Journal. And it's too bad he was dead, because he would have loved to read the wonderful things they said about him. Then they had a memorial service. And because he was so prominent, the whole community was there. They all filed past the casket. And they all made the same stupid comment people always make at funerals. He looked so peaceful, they said. Rigor mortis will do that to a body. They had this big service. They got up to eulogize him. He was an innovator, a master of new technology systems, one of them said. Somebody else said he was one of the leading entrepreneurs of his day. He was a man of principle, said a third person. He's a straight arrow. He would never cheat on his taxes or his expense account or his wife. Somebody else noted his civic achievements. This man was a pillar in the community. He knew everybody. He was a networker. And they erected a memorial to this man. And they wrote inspiring words on it. Leader, innovator, entrepreneur, visionary, success, especially that word, because he gave his life for that word. Success. They buried his body. They put up the marker and they all went home. When it was dark and there was no one present to observe, unseen, unheard, the angel of God comes to this cemetery and makes his way through all of the other gravestones, comes to the marker, and there traces with one finger the single word that God chose to assess this man's life. You know what it was? Fool. You fool, God says. It's Jesus' story. Now you have to ask yourself the question, why such harsh language? Jesus doesn't usually use language like that. Well, I don't think he's engaging in name calling. I think Jesus here is making a tragically accurate diagnosis. Because for all of this man's entrepreneurial brilliance, for all of the cost-benefit analysis and cash flow projections he ran, what's the one scenario he forgot to take into account in his forecast? It was death. He forgot he was going to die. And God stands amazed at the folly of any human being, no matter how smart, who painstakingly prepares every contingency, covers every base for every eventuality, no matter how unlikely, and then forgets the one inevitable certainty that stares all of us in the face, which is, I'm going to die one day. He neglected to plan for the most obvious and inescapable fact of human existence. What other word, Jesus asks, do you use to describe such folly? A human being so busy building up his little kingdom as if it would endure forever, he doesn't have any time for the kingdom of God, which will endure forever. So busy making a living, he doesn't make a life. This is a rich fool syndrome. It's characterized by two illusions that were very prominent in this man's life and are very prominent in our day. The first one is kind of captured by this man's favorite phrase, when things settle down. Get around to what matters one day when things settle down. Let me ask you a question, friends. When will things settle down? When you die. Things will settle way down when you die. You will be amazed at how much the pace of your life is going to slow when they put you in the ground. But probably not until then. When I first moved to this church, to this area, I called a friend of mine, the wisest man spiritually that I know, back in California, and told him a little bit about what life was like here, and asked him the question, what do I need to do to be healthy spiritually? What do I need to do to guard my heart? And there was a long pause, and I'll never forget these words. Then he said to me, you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. And there was another long pause. And I said to him, okay, I wrote that one down. Now, what else do you have to tell me? Because I don't have much time, and I want to get a lot of wisdom out of this conversation. He said, there is nothing else. He said, hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day. It has had other enemies in other days. In our day, in our world, hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life. Because you can hardly do anything the way that Jesus did it in a hurry. You cannot love in a hurry. You cannot listen to a child in a hurry. There's a real important distinction. He said Jesus was often busy. Busy is an external condition, a condition of the body. Jesus often had many things to do. He had teaching that needed to be taken care of and people who needed healing in his presence. He often had many things to do. He was often busy, but he was never hurried. Hurried is a condition of the soul. It is an inward condition where I am so frantic and preoccupied that I am unable to receive love from the Father and unable to be present with other people to give love to them. Things will not settle down. And if you wait to get around to what really matters in life, you will never do what God made you to do. You will never become who God made you to become. Your soul will wither and die. Things will not settle down. Hurry is the great enemy of spiritual life in our day. And you must ruthlessly eliminate hurry from your life. No one else will do this for you. Not your boss or your spouse or your kids or your parents. You must do this. There's a second illusion in this man's life and in our society, and it's the illusion that someday more will be enough. That's what this guy thought. If he just kept getting more, eventually it would lead to contentment. We kill ourselves for more. More choices, more experiences, more successes, more stuff. We're bombarded every day by millions of messages that tell us more eventually will lead to contentment. And we get stuff we don't even know what to do with. We couldn't even use it all. We were with friends on the East Coast not too long ago that had this very expensive TV satellite deal that gives them access to over 200 channels all the time. They could see 71,000 shows a month. 71,000. And then we get terrified we might miss something. So we get a VCR that'll record it for us. But of course, we're too busy to learn how to program the VCR. Now, you know this is just truth. Show of hands here. How many of you have a VCR? Okay, second question. This is honesty time. How many of you have not yet fully mastered every detail of your VCR's technological potential? Now, I'll tell you something. You never will. You never will. Not today, not tomorrow, not next week, not next month, not next year, not 10 years from now. You'll never know. You will die and you will never know how to fully use your VCR. And when you do die and the paramedics come to take away your cold, clammy body, they will list the time of death as 12 o'clock because that's the time that'll be blinking on the VCR that you never learned how to program. More will never be enough. But we live in this insane world that somehow thinks it will. If I could just make it more. Writers of Scripture have a very different take on contentment. The Apostle Paul, sitting in a jail cell, writes, "For I have learned the secret of being content in any situation when I live with God." Learned contentment. The Bible says contentment is learned behavior. And it depends on the perspective you bring to life. Snoopy one time is sitting on top of his doghouse, and it's Thanksgiving, and he's bitter in his spirit because Charlie Brown and the family are having this huge feast inside their house, but Snoopy is stuck on his doghouse with only dog food. And he's kind of grousing about that until this thought occurs to him, and he says to himself, it could be worse. I could have been born a turkey. I want to ask you to remember that little phrase, it could be worse. And if you take nothing else from this message, take that one with you. So I want to ask us to say it all together out loud. Here we go. It could be worse. I want to give you a couple of exercises for this one for the rest of the day. When you leave this room, you're going to go out in the parking lot and get in whatever vehicle you drove here in. And you're going to be tempted to think, if I just had another car, nicer car, newer car, bigger car, more expensive car, I'd be content. Because we get bombarded with that message all the time. But today, for once in your life, you're not going to think that. Instead, today, you're going to open the door of your car, get inside, and say to yourself with great passion, with tremendous passion and conviction. Okay, stay with me, friends. With enormous conviction, you're going to say to yourself, it could be worse, because it could be. It is for a lot of people. When you drive that car to wherever you live, your apartment, your condo, your house, you're going to be tempted to think when you walk inside the door, I'd be content if I just had a newer house, nicer house, bigger house, better house. Because we're bombarded with that message all the time. But not today. Today, for once in your life, when you come to the door, before you step across that threshold, you're going to stop and you're going to say to yourself with great passion, it could be worse, because it could be. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up and you roll over and you look at your spouse, you're going to say, don't do that one. I want to give you a kind of a picture. This is an analogy that comes from the world of games. It was used quite some time ago by a psychologist named James Dobson. I first learned it from my grandmother. My grandmother taught me how to play the game Monopoly. Now, my grandmother was a wonderful person. She raised 6 children. She was a widow by the time I knew her. Well, she lived in our house for many, many years. And she was a lovely woman, but she was the most ruthless Monopoly player I have ever known in my life. Imagine what would have happened if Donald Trump had married Leona Helmsley and they'd have had a child, and you have some picture of what my grandmother was like when she played Monopoly. She understood that the name of the game is to acquire. When we would play, and I was a little kid, and I got my money from the bank, I would always want to save it, hang on to it, because it was just so much fun to have money. She spent on everything she landed on. And then when she bought it, she would mortgage it as much as she could and buy everything else she landed on. She would accumulate everything she could. And eventually, she became the master of the board. And every time I landed, I would have to pay her money. And eventually, every time, she would take my last dollar, and I would quit in utter defeat. And then she would always say the same thing to me. She'd look at me and she'd say, one day, you'll learn to play the game. I hated it when she said that to me. But one summer, I played Monopoly with a neighbor kid, friend of mine, almost every day, all day long. We'd play Monopoly for hours. And that summer, I learned to play the game. I came to understand the only way to win is to make a total commitment to acquisition. I came to understand that money and possessions, that's the way that you keep score. And by the end of that summer, I was more ruthless than my grandmother. I was ready to bend the rules if I had to win that game. And I sat down with her to play that fall. Slowly, cunningly, I exposed my grandmother's vulnerability. Relentlessly, inexorably, I drove her off the board. The game does strange things to you. I can still remember it happened at Marvin Gardens. I looked at my grandmother. She taught me how to play the game. She was an old lady by now. She was a widow. She had raised my mom. She loved my mom. She loved me. I took everything she had. I destroyed her financially and psychologically. I watched her give her last dollar and quit in utter defeat. It's the greatest moment of my life. And then she had one more thing to teach me. Then she said, now it all goes back in the box. All those houses and hotels, all the railroads and utility companies, all that property and all that wonderful money. Now it all goes back in the box. I didn't want it to go back in the box. I wanted to leave the board out, bronze it maybe, as a memorial to my ability to play the game. No, she said. None of it was really yours. You got all heated up about it for a while. But it was around a long time before you sat down at the board. And it will be here after you're gone. Players come and players go. But it all goes back in the box. He was a shrewd guy, this man in Jesus' story. He learned to play the game, and he played the game real well. Not a bad thing to play the game well. He just forgot one thing. He forgot the game would end. He forgot the game would end. And the game always ends. For every player, the game ends. Every day, you pick up a newspaper and you can turn to a page that describes people for whom this week the game ended. Skilled businessman, an aging grandmother who's in a convalescent home with a brain tumor. Teenage kids who think they have the whole world in front of them and somebody drives through a stop sign. It all goes back in the box. Houses and cars, titles and clothes, filled barns, bulging portfolios, even your body. So you have to ask yourself the question, what matters? What's worth giving your life to? You know, some of you are visiting this morning and you hear what Nancy and Holly were talking about, people around here trying to take on a major giving challenge. And you may wonder, why is it that when money is in kind of scarce supply in this world and it's the way you keep score, why are people trying to figure out ways to give it away? Well, really, it's just kind of a return on investment deal. Because the fact is that everything I clutch and consume and hoard is going to go back in the box, and I'm going to lose it all. That's not much of an ROI on that. But what you invest in God and in the people that matter to God so much can take on an eternal significance. And people who come to understand this stay up awake at night trying to figure out ways to give it, to invest it in a way that will make a difference. Now, there's an alternative road, and you can go down it if you want to. This story that Jesus told has been lived out millions and millions and millions of times. You don't have to believe the Bible to believe the story that he told. You can just see it every day. This is from a magazine article that Bill Hybels wrote some time ago. See if you can figure out who he's talking about. All he ever wanted was more. He wanted more money, so he parlayed inherited wealth into $1 billion pile of assets. He wanted more fame, so he broke into the Hollywood scene and soon became a filmmaker and star. He wanted more sensual pleasures, so he paid handsome sums to indulge his every sexual urge. He wanted more thrills, so he designed, built, and piloted the fastest aircraft in the world. He wanted more power, so he secretly dealt political favors so skillfully that 2 U.S. presidents became his pawns. All he ever wanted was more. He was absolutely convinced that more would bring him true satisfaction. Unfortunately, history shows otherwise. This man concluded his life emaciated, colorless, sunken chest, fingernails in grotesque inches-long corkscrews, rotting black teeth, tumors, innumerable needle marks from his drug addiction. Anybody want to guess? Howard Hughes died believing the myth of more, a billionaire junkie, insane by all reasonable standards. It's the same story. You got to ask yourself the question. If Howard Hughes had pulled off one more deal, made $1 more million, had one more powerful politician in his hip pocket, would it have been enough? Would it ever have been enough? She was the most admired woman of her day. Every man wanted her, every woman envied her. But Marilyn Monroe died alone, died of her own hand. Ask yourself the question, if she'd have had one more hit movie, graced one more magazine cover, had a sexual relationship with one more powerful man, would it ever have been enough? Suppose Nance and I were to say that she was going to take one day, take a credit card with no ceiling on it, go to Neiman Marcus and buy everything she wanted to, just an absolute spree. Every dress, every piece of jewelry, every expensive item all day long. Would it be enough? Well, we'll never know. How far do you have to walk down that road, Jesus asks the human race, before you see where it leads? Surely you understand, it'll never be enough. You don't even have to believe the Bible to see that. Just consider where life leads. This is from Jerry Seinfeld. He wrote this a few years ago. To me, if life boils down to one significant thing, it's movement. To live is to keep moving. Unfortunately, this means that for the rest of our lives, we're going to be looking for boxes. When you're moving, your whole world is boxes. That's all you think about. Boxes. Where are the boxes? You just wander down the street going in and out of stores. Are there boxes here? Have you seen any boxes? It's all you think about. You could be at a funeral. Everyone around you is mourning, crying, and you're looking at the casket. That's a nice box. Anybody know where that guy got that box? When he's done with it, you think I could get it? It's got some nice handles on it. My stereo would fit right in there. I mean, that's what death is, really, the last big move of your life. The hearse is like the van. The pallbearers are your close friends, the only ones you could ask to help you with a big move like that. And the casket is that great, perfect box you've been waiting for your whole life. Because it all goes back in the box. There is a simple two-word question that the man in Jesus' story never asked himself. It's the question, then what? He thought his problem was that he had too much stuff and not enough closet space. His assumption was that his wealth would last. He just needed a place to put it. And he never thought to ask himself, when I finally have enough, when the barn is full and I'm financially secure, then what? You have to ask yourself, when you finally get the ultimate promotion, when you've made the ultimate purchase, when you buy the ultimate home, when you have stored up financial security and climbed the ladder of success to the highest rung you can possibly climb it, and the thrill wears off, and it will wear off, then what? What are you going to do with a cold marriage or none at all? What are you going to do with kids who learned a long time ago that they're not as important as a briefcase and a meeting and a barn full of stuff? How important will all that stuff be? Don't you know? God asks, how quickly life passes. Don't you know? A woman named Mary Jean Irion wrote a little piece called Gift from a Hairdryer. It's reflections of a mom as she combs her 7-year-old daughter's hair after a bath. And somehow it kind of captures what a precious thing life is. Comb and dry, comb and dry. Soon I won't be able to do this anymore, you say to yourself, knowing that the little straight bob must inevitably yield to grown-up coiffures and ugly curlers. What will she be like at 14? Where will her hair be blowing then? And 16 and 18, you suppose boys will love to watch your hair blow as you do now, and some of them will feel it on their faces, and one of them will marry her, and her hair will be spread under the veil and then spread out on his pillow. And oh, you hate him a little, and wonder where he is at this moment, whether he'll be good to her. And they will grow old together. And the gold brown hair will be gray. And you will be gone. and then she will be gone. This very hair that now your fingers smooth. And all the tears of the world swim for a second in your eyes as you snatch the plug out of the socket suddenly and gather her into your arms, burying your face in the warm hair as if you could seal this moment against all time. But of course you can't. Because moments come and years fly and you cannot stop them and you cannot control them. And one day the final moment of your life will come and you cannot control that either. And Jesus says anybody who goes through life, no matter how well they play the game and doesn't prepare for that moment, is not a smart guy. So I have to ask you this morning, are you ready for that moment? Are you living your life before God in such a way that when that moment comes, you will look back on a life of wisdom? Or are you walking down a road that's going to lead to major regret? I just want to give you a moment to reflect before we're through. In your programs, you find this little card. Now, on one side it says it all goes back in the box. And the other side is blank. And I'd like you to take this with you this morning. And I'd like you to write on the back side whatever decision or commitment that you need to make. So that when it all goes back in the box for you, you will look back on a life that was led wisely. I want to ask you to close your eyes for just a moment right now. And even though there's a lot of people in this room right now, this is just a moment between you and God, a real private moment. I just want to ask you to ask yourself some real deep questions. What game are you playing right now? What road are you walking down? What illusion has its hooks into you? Because things will never settle down in this world. Because more will never be enough in this world. And all that will last for eternity is God and the people He loves so much. That's all. And one day you're going to stand before that God. Are you living in such a way that you'll be ready for that moment? And friends, I just want to plead with you for 1 second before we leave. Whatever needs to get changed, whatever decision needs to be made, whatever you need to cut out or turn around, do it. Do it. Would you stand for closing prayer? And again, as soon as we're done here, if you have any questions about chapter 2, come on down to room 206 and I'll be there. And given what we talked about today, when we leave in just a minute, don't be in a hurry. Let somebody go past you in the parking lot. Heavenly Father, you have set eternity in our hearts. Help us to remember that we have just this moment, just this one life. Help us to live it really wisely. Help us to remember it all goes back in the box. In Jesus' name, amen.